SEP Fanfic Readings presents 1,000 Words by Olive Juice 28. Chapter 30. Cupid Conspiracies. In what had become true 8th year fashion, the plans and preparations for the upcoming Valentine's party were anything but simple. Padma had created invitations that sprinkled pink and red confetti over the heads of their intended recipients before allowing to be caught and read. And Dean thought it would be hilarious to make each first year recite some sort of love poem before they could gain entrance to the room. Mealtimes leading up to the party were full of outlandish ideas and bouts of raucous laughter. It was during one such dinner hour that the doors to the room opened, admitting Bill Weasley as an unexpected guest. The lanky redhead approached the table with an amused grin as he took in the scene before him. One of Padma's invitation prototypes was currently hovering over Theo, dumping what seemed to be an unending amount of confetti on top of his thick, dark brown hair. He was pretending to ignore it, while allowing the pile to steadily grow, forming a small mountain of pink and red that almost looked like a party hat. "What are you lot up to?" Bill asked the group at large. "Party planning," Daphne enthusiastically replied. "We're hosting a Valentine's party for our first years." She gestured first to the snack list Anthony was creating on her right, and then to the sketches Hannah and Luna were working on for decorations on the other side of the table. "You and Fleur should come," Dean suggested with a nod. "Oh, yes," Hermione agreed. "We'd love to have you." Bill met her eyes with a mischievous smirk and shrugged. "Maybe, if we have time after the romantic dinner I've planned." His admission was met with wolf whistles from the boys and fluttery sighs from the girls, causing him to chuckle. "Do you need any help with anything for it?" The housemates pondered his offer for a moment, most eventually shaking their heads, unable to think of anything, but Neville piped up. "We were thinking about a game using emertentia." He rushed on to explain as Bill's eyebrows shot into his hair and a cautioning look crossed his scarred features. "Not to give it to them or anything. Merlin, no." He laughed nervously and Bill's countenance relaxed. "We wanted to do sort of a guessing game with it. We would tweak it to smell like certain things and see if they could identify them. The student with the most correct answers would win a prize, yeah?" Bill looked thoughtful and slowly started nodding his head. "I could see how that would work." With that, he pulled out a chair and engaged Neville, Dean, and Anthony in conversation, since the three of them had been tossing the idea around together. At the other end of the table, Draco was attempting to calm his heart rate, which had rocketed like a seeker zooming after a snitch at the mention of the powerful love potion. He was absolutely positive that any batch of Ametentia he came within a broomstick's length would smell like apricots, vanilla, orange blossoms, and obsidian No. 5, which was a brand of ink particular to one curly-haired witch, who happened to be sitting next to him. He hadn't dared to look at her during Neville's description of the game, for fear that she would see the panic in his eyes. He had known since New Year's Eve that he was falling hard for Hermione, but he hadn't let on at all, lest he scare her off. Being back at Hogwarts had allowed them to settle into wonderfully comfortable routine with each other, and he wasn't about to muck that up by telling her he was in love with her. Draco choked on the pumpkin juice he had been attempting to casually drink while masking the internal circus that had commenced with Neville's announcement. He was in love with her? It was a question, truly, because he wasn't entirely sure that was what he was feeling. He liked her tremendously. He thought her beautiful, witty, incredibly intelligent, and kind. He enjoyed every moment with her, even when they were bickering over class notes or literary opinions. She challenged him and encouraged him. She was the first person he thought of when he woke up each morning, and the last one he let cross his mind each night as he fell asleep. He knew he wanted to be everything she needed, and give her everything she wanted. But in love with her? Is that what this was? Regardless, it was definitely something that would require deeper consideration and introspection, which was not going to occur around the noisy dinner table, and most definitely not while the witch in question was gripping his arm and watching him with concern, coloring her whiskey-brown eyes. His cheeks were flaming, and his eyes were starting to water, while his esophagus rebelled. "You all right?" she asked as he continued to splutter and cough. He nodded feebly, unable to get the words out while hacking up a lung. "I think he must have swallowed a Raxpert," Luna interjected solemnly. "I saw a few buzzing around before, and they're very fond of pumpkin juice. One might have gotten in his cup." As a means of stalling and deflecting, Draco picked the offending beverage up again, looked into the goblet as if there might really be one of the ludicrous creatures in its depths. He shook his head and offered the cup to Luna to inspect for herself, while using his other hand to wipe his streaming eyes. "Ugh!" He let out a low groan and cleared his throat. "I'm fine. It's all good, right?" He chuckled, coughing again, and thumped his chest with a fist. Hermione was still watching him carefully, but now with a small smile curving her lips. You sure? She asked. Mm-hmm. He cautiously took another sip of juice, wanting to clear his airway and praying to all the founders that it wouldn't cause another bout of gagging. Taking a deep breath, he turned to face her fully. There, totally fine. No choking to death today. She grinned and turned her attention back to the plate. Good. I quite like having you around. If possible, his cheeks flamed even hotter. Hermione's first years were beside themselves with excitement over the party. They were currently gathered for their weekly peer group dinner in the Great Hall, and no matter how many times she tried to steer the conversation towards their academics, or their interest, or anything she considered to be worthwhile use of their time, they chased another rabbit down the unending hole of gossip and speculation. I really think Aiden should ask Emmeline to go to the party with him. Darlie stared dreamily at the enchanted ceiling, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. But I think she wants to go with, someone else. Allison stumbled over her words and shot a sideways glance at Malcolm, who was lost in his own thoughts as she swirled his mashed potatoes around his plate. What? Darla asked, apparently unaware of this bit of news. Who does she want to go with? She watched her friend make a frantic gesture, clearly wanting to drop the subject. The young Ravenclaw continued to stare in confusion as Allison darted furtively yet pointed glares in the direction of the only male member of their table. After her third delivery, Darla's eyes widened and her jaw dropped in shock. You mean... But Allison cut her off by blurting out in a much louder voice than necessary. Who are you going to the party with, Hermione? The older witch had been watching the entire exchange with exasperated amusement and was caught mildly off guard by the sudden swing of the spotlight. Me? I'm not. I mean, all of the 8th years were throwing the party, so we'll all be there together. It was a feeble answer, and she knew her girls wouldn't be satisfied with such a banal response. Case in point, they both scowled at her in mock irritation and immediately challenged the truth of her words. You mean you won't be going with your good friend, Draco Malfoy? Allison wiggled her eyebrows as she spoke. Yes, since you two seem to go everywhere else together, Darla joined in. What do you mean we go everywhere? Hermione started to question their accusations, but they rolled right over her, continuing in their disbelief. I saw him carrying your bag across the entrance hall the other day. I saw him hold the door for you when you were going into your potions class yesterday morning. You always sit next to each other in the library. Yeah, usually off in some dark, secluded little corner. Well, I saw them holding hands when they were walking down by the lake last weekend. Malcolm had finally joined the conversation and shared this impressive bit of information with the air of a cat who just got the canary. The girls were stunned into silence for roughly 4 glorious seconds before rounding on Hermione, who was trying to think of an excuse to escape before they started squealing and bouncing up and down in their seats, demanding to know all the details. Hermione glared at Malcolm, who just crossed his arms and grinned smugly. Sighing deeply, she couldn't help the smile that tugged at her lips as she thought of the tall blonde. They had gone for a very nice long walk around the lake, even though it was freezing cold and there was snow covering the ground. Warming charms can do wonders, after all. While she and Draco had no qualms about other students or faculty finding out about their relationship, they hadn't exactly broadcasted it. She supposed it was a miracle her little gang hadn't found out before now, seeing as they had been back in the castle for over a month. Okay. She raised her hands in mock surrender. I will answer 3 questions about my relationship with Draco, and that's it. The girls looked slightly mutinous, while Malcolm chortled and rolled his eyes. Take it or leave it, Hermione stated firmly. Fine, both girls whined out a half-hearted agreement, but immediately perked up and started whispering to each other, clearly trying to decide what questions would be most important to ask. While they were debating, their mentor turned her attention back to the young Gryffindor at the table. So, Malcolm, have anyone in mind for a Valentine? Hermione smirked as his cheeks turned red and he visibly gulped. Nope, no one, no, not at all, he rambled, not meeting her eye. But she was positive he was hiding something and she was curious. He had never expressed any interest in any of the first-year girls as far as she had seen. Really? She pressed on. You sure? It's not too late to ask someone to come to the party with you. She hid a grin as his embarrassment clearly increased. Or you could always wait until you're at the party and then approach her. His eyes grew wide, and she got the distinct feeling she was honing in on something. You could chat with her over snacks, or ask her to dance, or offer to get some photos made together. She trailed off, leaving the possibilities floating out there. Malcolm's face had taken on a dreamy quality for a split second, and then he shook his head, pinned her with a serious look. There's going to be dancing again? Yes, of course. And we can get photos made? Yes, Hannah Abbott got a new camera for Christmas and is setting up a fun backdrop with props and everything. Hermione stifled a laugh as Malcolm's face broke into a grin, clearly pleased with this bit of news. Someone you want to get a picture with, then, she teased. He stared at her for a beat and boldly replied, Maybe. At this point, Darla and Allison had come to a conclusion about their three most imperative queries, and Hermione's attention was drawn back to the giggling girls. When did you two become an item? Allison asked briskly. An item? Hermione chuckled, feeling like she was being interrogated by an aged aunt. Yes, when did you officially get together? Oh, I suppose over the holidays. Hermione thought back to when it all began. She guessed their house Christmas party was really the start of it, but it was officially made at Harry's party on New Year's Eve. Are you, or are you not, attending the Valentine's Day party together? This was serious business to Allison, who continued to pin her with a firm stare. We actually haven't talked about it, Hermione mused, wondering if they needed to make a formal thing of it since both of them were clearly going to be there. The rest of their housemates knew they were together, so was an actual invitation necessary? She really had no idea, seeing as she'd never been in any sort of serious dating relationship before. Victor had asked her to the ball, and then they had been pen friends. When she asked Cormac to Slughorn's party and then avoided him like the plague, she and Ron had never progressed beyond one kiss, and had really only ever been best of friends, so she had nothing to compare her current situation to. Darla's nervous giggle broke into her thoughts, and she focused on the young girl, who now had a faraway look on her face. Is he a good kisser? It was obvious the first year was still holding fast to her crush on one particular 8th year. Hermione's eyes bugged at that question, and she could feel the heat rushing to her cheeks. She tried not to let her mind wander back to the very sweet moment they had shared right before she left the room to meet her charges that evening. I am not about to divulge those kind of details, Hermione started to splutter, but Allison, ever the Slytherin, cut her off. He is, then, she crowed. If he were rubbish, you would have said, or at least made a face, but you smiled and blushed and tried to pass it off. She looked triumphant, while Darla looked ready to swoon, and Malcolm was studying his mentor with new interest. Did he ask you if he could kiss you? The young man looked very serious, so Hermione decided not to remind him that her 3-question limit had already been reached. What do you mean, Malcolm? Before he kissed you for the first time, did he ask you? My mom says a gentleman always asks for a lady's permission. The bold Gryffindor was blushing by then, but had such an earnest look on his face, Hermione was compelled to be completely honest. Well, not exactly. Malcolm scowled at this news, so Hermione rushed on to clarify, lest he think poorly of his volunteer flying instructor. You see, the very first time we kissed, I was the one who initiated it. The girls were now staring at her in awe and wonder, but Malcolm looked confused. I kissed him first. She watched as this registered with her young friend, his eyes going wide and his brows slowly climbing up to his fringe. Really? He marveled. Girls can kiss first? At this, Hermione really did laugh. Yes, Malcolm, girls can kiss first, but you are right. It is always a very nice idea to ask someone if you can kiss them. Who's kissing someone? A deep, familiar voice came from behind her, sending a curl of warmth swirling through her. If she wasn't so surprised by his sudden appearance, the looks on all 3 of her first year's faces would have been comical. Malcolm looked guilty, as if he'd been caught asking something he shouldn't. Allison was slack-jawed with shock, and Darla looked like someone had spiked her pumpkin juice as she ogled the handsome wizard standing there. Hermione couldn't help the giggle that escaped, and rolled her eyes in exaggerated annoyance. Apparently we are. She met his amused gaze with a mischievous wink, and was rewarded with a lopsided grin as his cheeks flushed lightly. Oh, really? He cleared his throat and stepped aside as she slid her chair out from the table and stood to leave. Yes, although I must apologize for a grievous oversight on my part. She snuck a sideways glance at Malcolm, who was watching their exchange intently. Apologize? Draco was completely bemused. Whatever for? I never asked your permission for the first time I kissed you, quite possibly besmirching your honor. She tilted her head to the side, a playful smile on her lips. Do you feel besmirched? Very much so, Draco replied seriously, jutting his chin out and sniffing disdainfully. I shall require a great deal of recompense, which... He peeked at her out of the corner of his eye and could tell she was holding back a laugh. Allowing his inner Slytherin to make an appearance, he wanted to see what she would do if he pushed it a little. I think a formal public acknowledgement is in order. I do not deserve to be handled like some ill-gotten trinket. Hermione was now trembling with suppressed mirth and biting the inside of her cheek to keep from losing it altogether. Draco was being adorably ridiculous. The look on her charges' faces were priceless, and they were no longer the only audience. Students at the surrounding tables had now taken an interest in the goings-on, as had some of the staff at the front of the hall. In her periphery, she could see Headmistress McGonagall and Professor Sprout, heads inclined towards each other while they watched the two eighth-years. She decided she might as well give them something to talk about. Taking a step closer to him, she widened her eyes in mock surprise and chagrin. "You are absolutely correct." He turned his face back to her, but still kept his air of righteous indignation, his arms folded across his chest. "You most certainly do not deserve to be treated in such a paltry and trifling way. Perhaps this token of my affection will prove my devotion." She raised herself up on her tiptoes and placed a soft, lingering kiss right at the corner of his mouth. It only lasted the space of 2 heartbeats, but it was long enough to garner a reaction from more than half of the occupants in the hall, as gasps and whispers started swirling around. When she lowered her heels, she was pleased to see he looked a little gobsmacked. Clearly, he'd not been expecting that from her. Grinning, she turned back to her first-years, who were now in fits over the whole display, and reminded them about the time of the party 3 days hence. Not waiting for a coherent response, which she knew would be lacking, she turned back to her boyfriend. "Shall we go?" She tilted her head towards the doors and held out her hand. He immediately entwined his fingers with hers, a beaming smile gracing his features as they exited the hall.